My name is Steve, and I belong to Cinnamon. Like many, I'm an avid outdoorsman with dreams of summiting the tallest mountains. To help fuel my passion for outdoor travel, I work in the outdoor retail industry.
Can I get my discount on all this?
Sure.
And like most, I was convinced I had to leave behind my homeland in order to find the stuff of legends.
Do you feel a strong sense of passion?
Who would I be? Would I be more extreme, exotic, cultured, enlightened?
Do you hear a voice telling you something?
But then, something happened. I stepped out my backyard, I gazed upon the same horizon I've seen thousands of times before,
Open your eyes, brother.
and the unthinkable happened. I was inspired.
We got one life.
My buddy and I designed an adventure, one that would challenge us, grow us, and force us to let go of everything we took for granted, our home. And in that moment, the Ode to Minnesota was born. Our journey was to take us from St. Paul to the border of Canada by bike, and then paddle the Great Voyageur Lakes through Boundary Waters to the shores of Lake Superior, and eventually backpack home along the Superior Hiking Trail and highways until we once again reached my house in St. Paul. The twist? The expedition would be completed using primarily gear made in Minnesota. An entirely homebred adventure to see what both we and Minnesota were truly made of. But then my buddy got a job out of state. The idea sat for years, possibly never to happen. And then finally, in 2018, I decided it was now or never, even if I had to do it alone. Enter Eli and his dog Dio,
Takes the sum of you and me.
a random stranger I met at work one day. I told him my plan and he was hooked. I had a partner again, and so did Cinnamon. So with our bikes, canoes, backpacks, and a new friendship that would prove to be an adventure all of its own, we set out on our Ode to Minnesota, and this is our tale of trails.
I was ramped up. I was ready to go. Like the whole night before, could not sleep at all. And I was like, oh my God, this is happening tomorrow. And I even wrote in my journal that night that I was just like so excited.
I'm not a cyclist, and so I was putting everything together on my bike and really not knowing what I was doing. I was just doing my best. I was doing all the things I knew I needed to do, but at the same time, it was a whole lot of this, like, okay, if I get a flat tire in the next hour, I might cry, because I don't know how to deal with that situation yet. The first couple of days, I don't think I ever had that feeling of dauntingness where it was like too much to handle, because you very quickly get into the here and now.
Ode to Minnesota, day one is done, buddy.
Yeah.
Like overall, the day was great. But this morning, I was still kind of nervous. But once we got on trail, it was good.
For the first few hours, I was like, is it gonna happen? And then, successful day.
Tomorrow is going to be even better.
Right.
So.
On day 3, we had spent all morning in Duluth and we had a really late start. There's a lot of construction and obstruction, and we were like, okay, maybe we take these back roads and avoid all this. Wrong move. We started going west and we had this route that was bringing us straight north. And then it told us to take a left, and we looked left and there was nothing. It was just a field where some old train tracks were, and we're like, oh my God, like this isn't going anywhere.
I'm on Bergstrom Road in the middle of bum Minnesota. So we had to go south. I literally have been going south for about 5 miles to get back onto 53. I told Steve, you know what? I'll pop a motel room tonight if we get into Eveleth at like 10 p.m. I'm running low on patience for just about everything. So
You can trust Google Maps, but not Google directions.
went up, and then we came back down. We call it the Grand Horseshoe.
This fire is burning down the forest. This fire is burning through the fields. This fire is burning a brand new way.
By day 3, and then pretty much from then on, we both realized that we just had to really be open with each other about stuff that was going on, and also be really realistic with each other about kind of how we were doing on the trip.
You know, people ask, okay, you guys didn't really know each other that well before you went on this trip. Did you fight? If we were experiencing some difficulties physically or mentally, it wasn't ever an option to spill that crap onto the other guy. And in fact, the best part is that we both knew that the best thing to do is to leave someone alone until they come to you.
Yeah, we had this system where we just both did our thing.
And I would probably attribute that independent nature of the trip to the fact that we didn't really have any problems. So we were apart, but not apart.
This fire.
I knew with the heavier bike that I was going to have and with towing a dog, I was going to be significantly slower. I was like the semi smoking the Bandit, and Eli was like the little Trans Am car zipping around ahead of me.
I knew from our test run with the bikes that I wasn't going to be ready physically to haul him on the trailer. So I left him at home and knew that he'd get brought up to the paddling portion. So I had a little carrot at the end of the trail. I got there, I was like, I can't believe I just biked 350 miles. Once I kind of gathered myself, I got on my phone to figure out where he was because he was pinging. And I was like, oh God, he's really far behind. Well, he got a flat tire on the trailer, on the dog trailer. And he was stopped at a gas station fixing it. I don't know, I felt guilty. Like I felt guilty that he was still out there in the pain, right? And that
It was all done.
And I was done.
And I was just like, all right, I gotta fix this flat tire and just get it done. And all right, I still gotta go, let's go.
Yeah.
Bring it in, baby. Right on, man.
Dude, that hill was crazy.
I know, right?
Oh my God. Oh yeah.
So what I wanted to do with each section of the Ode to Minnesota is, other than the overall trip having its own story, I wanted each section to have an individual story. And each section kind of focuses on one particular thing that either represents Minnesota or Minnesota is facing right now. We ride over the Roosevelt Pit in Virginia. Iron mining in particular has been a really big factor in Minnesota's history, and people have some strong feelings on both sides. Some are in favor of mining because it definitely is a promoter of business, and it definitely helps families kind of stay financially sound. But then you have the other folks that are very, very much not in favor of it. But more so when you start talking about mining, people automatically think of the copper nickel mining, the sulfide mining that's being proposed. My personal feeling on it is that I still think that people can maintain a quality of life and a living without risking a place like the Boundary Waters, because once those are gone, they're gone. Like, we can't get them back again.
I do have most of a permit done for tonight. I still need an emergency contact.
Yep. Paddling section is kind of more of a historical ode, which is basically paddling the entirety of what's called the Voyageurs Highway. And so the route that we're doing is kind of the main highway vein of waterways into the heart of the Boundary Waters canoe area and what was originally known as Indian country. Paddling the exact route of what's called the Voyageurs Highway. The main highway that voyageurs and fur traders would use to bring goods from Montreal and Canada and Quebec into the interior of Indian country, like knives, pots, things like that. They would then bring the furs out. At Grand Portage, where we're going to be ending our paddling section, is where they would basically have the massive switchover. And so the furs would then go on the massive north canoes that are, paddled by like 12 guys. They'd zip across Lake Superior towards Montreal, where they'd be made into hats and things like that. And then when they got there, they'd load up the canoes again with more goods and bring them back to Grand Portage.
So the scale of the trip is finally starting to sink in. I've spent a little under a week out here, and now that I'm about to enter a wilderness area, it's getting a little bit more intense and real.
Finally, I'm off the bike, thank God.
Well, first campsite, little Finlander Island. Dio's checking the perimeter. Oh, dropping a dookie. Oh, I can't believe we got that on film. We got a sand beach. This is just beautiful. Rainy Lake is really something.
So now, okay, so like
This is when all the British Columbia fires are happening this summer, and the sky is smoky and the sun is blood red. It was a very different Boundary Waters experience.
we saw 2 eagles fly over the camp and were actually courting. They could clasp talons and then flew off together in the direction that we were going to be heading the next morning. And we were both just sitting there like, seeing that really is what initiated the beginning of the spiritual part of this trip. You know, the focus of the paddling trip was to highlight the voyager's historical significance, right? But it also has a huge spiritual significance to the indigenous population. So having us experience that aspect of it throughout the entire trip is really just what made that section of it probably one of my favorites.
There's places that people have been forever. Before the fur trade, the native people are there, and they're still there. And it's a special place. They said, well, you know, we need somebody to paddle halfway. You're the one person I know will be there when we get there. Could you do it? And I said, yeah, I can do that. I met them at Upper Basswood Falls. I brought them treats, hamburger, sweet corn, butter, things that they couldn't carry on their adventure. They were most grateful about that.
Every morning when we let out, there was an eagle that let out of a tree near us and would fly where we were going. It happened every day.
Every single day.
We stopped by the famous pictographs, and this loon came up a few feet away from us and started talking to us, right? And it was very aggressive. He's got to be the one that guards this place, right? As I'm saying that, our eagle flies down just feet above our heads. The loon disappears and never comes back up. There was a lot of stuff like that with some of the wildlife where there was almost a dialogue. We were of the myth that we were living, you know, like we were in it. The day the eagle didn't show up is the day when certain events took place because we were getting a little too cocky. The loons spent all morning laughing.
I just cackle.
Just that loon laugh that they have, right? And it was incessant. It was continuous throughout the morning. So we lit off from Gunflint Lodge at about 3 in the afternoon. And we had 2-foot rollers. I'm just a few yards ahead of them, luckily. And I hear this whoosh behind me. So I look back, and right as he's turned sideways, the wave grows. It was just enough to throw him off balance, and he went over. We got Cinna in first, we got his gear in, and then we hauled him in, and he says, dude, I can't find the maps. I think we lost the maps. Start looking for the maps. I'm like, oh my gosh.
At that point, like my whole egotistical, cocky self of, you know, I've paddled in the Boundary Waters more than 200 times, which I had, that just dropped a weight on me because I was like, how could I be so stupid? How could I be so stupid to detach the maps of my boat, knowing that at any point, no matter how skilled I am, I could possibly go in the water.
The real lesson is to always, everyone needs to have their own maps.
Second set of maps.
At least a second set, for sure, in different boats. We had to address the navigational issues, what we were going to do in the next 12 to 24 hours. And we basically pulled together everything that we had, and we made a map in his journal that we were comfortable enough with to move forward the next day.
Okay, so it's August 22nd, and this is what camp looks like right after somebody tips over their canoe and everything's wet.
From this day on, it was almost a whole totally different trip. Is it here? We had to utilize a lot more of our woodsman skills, being able to read the horizons, use the compass to figure out directions. In some cases, using the sun to get us through, to get to the Pigeon River.
Your internal clock gets reset. and you're able to know what time it is. You're able to know where you're at. It's an innate thing that happens because essentially we're animals. And when you're insulated with electronics and modern world, a lot of that melts away. And you don't really have to even concentrate on that when you go back out. It just comes back.
Those last 2 days before we headed to the Pigeon River was awesome. And neither of us had been on the Grand Portage before. This thick fog just kind of enveloped us and we couldn't see more than 15 yards in front of us. It was eerily just dead quiet, like no birds, no nothing. I half expected a Voyageur's canoe full of Voyageurs to just float by us singing songs. That mindset just led right up to getting to Fort Charlotte. Okay, there's this super sweet campsite and we're in this historic place. And we've got this 9-mile hike in front of us tomorrow.
Way up in the North Country Fair, where legends are born and people take care, where the boundary waters caress a stone.
It turns out that 8.5 miles is like over 2,000 rods. And had you told me I was about to do a 2,000 rod portage, I probably would have tried to find a way to paddle around.
See you around the bend.
The next place I saw them was at Grand Portage.
Oh, walk in the park.
Piece of cake with 23 pounds of North Star canoe.
By the time I got to the monument, I walked right through it and I went directly to the lake and put my boat in the water because that really was like the punctuation on the end of that experience.
When I heard he was putting his boat in the lake, I immediately went there and that was like a perfect culmination of this aspect of the trip.
It felt really good. Yeah, that's really the only way to talk about it.
See you around the bend.
And immediately went back and scarfed down the entire pizza.
Yeah.
I stopped and got him a pizza.
So good.
It's up there. Halfway through the biking section, we were looking forward to paddling. Halfway through the paddling, we were looking forward to the backpacking.
Waking up that morning, I realized that as far as days-wise, we are now at the halfway point of this trip. Like we've been gone for 3 weeks, and now we've got basically 3 weeks left.
Now it's about the return, and that's really was the different feeling that the backpacking had is, okay, now we're turning back and it feels like we're going home.
Yeah.
We got onto that 270 overlook and we actually saw the Pigeon River, which we had been on the day before. We saw where we were, we saw where we were going, and it was like a shift in mental direction, not just physically. Then it became about getting home and finishing rather than getting from one section to the next. I'd done some backpacking trips, but I'd never done an ultralight sort of experience where I was really going scant with my gear. We were right around Temperance River and my knee finally just gave up. And so I started limping and I limped for about 10 miles and I was getting really down on myself. It was day 5, 6, or 7, and I had some friends up that were hiking with us, just doing a section. In that 10 miles, I had made the decision to send Dio home with my friends.
You might say there's ups and downs. You climb a mountain, then you fall back down.
He was losing a lot of weight rapidly. He was chafing pretty bad from his pack. So I had to make the really humble decision that I couldn't handle having him. Steve's behind me and he's making sure that I don't get left behind, basically. I'm alone and I look down and in the mud are Dio's little footprints and I just broke and I started to bawl. And if you can imagine what it's like to bawl your eyes out while hiking, that's exactly what it sounds like. Because there's nothing else to do but to just keep moving your body. Like, to stop is ridiculous, right?
I had no idea.
He had no idea that was happening.
This was happening.
I felt like the weak one in the herd that was gonna like fall and die.
When we got to this kind of later part where he started having issues with his knee, one of the things that kept popping back in my head was like, well, you know, I need to be back.
I wasn't upset with myself, right? I couldn't be. But at the same time, I was starting to really really feel the pressure of how's this whole thing gonna end?
It's my body that's keeping us from going forward.
I think I'll fly away from this town.
I had to face the fact that this trip was not anything like I thought it would be. To understand that going out there, in the end, like, had very little to do with feeling extreme in the moment. And more than anything, it gave me perspective. Like, the real extreme part was that it changed the way that I look at everything. I essentially took a zero at Nero, you know, and we spent the whole day there. And the Nero really, like, one day of rest in my knee was a lot better.
And someday soon your time will come around, and you can fly away from this town.
What was interesting though is when we would go into town, it felt like we were walking into a circus ring. We were the clowns running around.
I didn't expect that. I thought for sure I was gonna want rejuvenation from town, but the rejuvenation came from getting back into the woods.
It was almost like a totally different alien world and mindset of certain people that really had no idea what was just a couple blocks away.
But as you moved towards Duluth, you could see how important the trail was. The more you could see the financial, the economical impact that hikers have on the surrounding businesses.
The Schreader Trail is the most well-known of the hiking trails in Minnesota. It has gained popularity significantly over the last 5 to 6 years. So, I mean, it's not just like a significance in a wilderness perspective, but also a financial perspective. And that trail does a lot of business. This is the point at which I was waking up in the morning going, holy shit, I'm still on this goddamn trip.
At Jay Cook, I met them with their bicycles. By the time it got to that portion, they just wanted to come home. So I'm watching on the computer them, here they come. They're on the north end of St. Paul, and there was a storm like no other.
We start just booking it, and it was just like a torrential downpour, and it just started coming, sheets of rain.
I sat in front of Steve's house waiting for him to show up, and it was just a gully washer by this time. And I said, well, this is fitting that just washes you guys down at the end of this whole thing and wash all the crust off of you and just leave it in the alleyway.
And we finally get back here, and your dad's waiting.
Yep. Once we got back to the garage, it was like, well, that's over. You know, like...
It's exactly what it was.
It's what it was.
We gave our high fives, we hung out for like a couple seconds, and he's like, all right, I'm gonna head out. I'm like, all right, sweet.
That was the beginning of like a huge life transformation for me. The effects of that experience are still manifesting in all these different dimensions of my life. The whole trip was a huge inhale, and now I'm exhaling, and the breath of it has not completed yet. Right now I'm on a path that I am so grateful to be on, living the way I was living on the trip everywhere. But to be like that here is a much bigger challenge, and I feel like it gave me a glimpse of how capable I am of doing that and just how rewarding it is to live that way.
All the places where you spend your time, spend some time with you.
For me, it was never like I ended the trip. Like, I just kept going. Like, I just kept living it because I kept talking about it all the time. And I utilized that experience that I'd gotten from the trip to enhance what I was doing on my regular daily life through presentations or through giving people opportunities to go out and enjoy the outdoors or whatever it might be. Or, I mean, we really have taken off with this podcast ever since I got back. So it was really easy for me to just slip right back into normal life.
I've always told Eli, I said, you don't have to go anyplace if you don't want to. There's some fantastic places right here in Minnesota to see.
You don't have to go anywhere. You can literally just create something out of your backyard and just go do it. I mean, most people, when they think about grand expeditions, they think of big grand mountains. They think of, you know, the Arctic, the Himalayas, Patagonia, places like that. Most people don't think of this grand, over 1,000-mile expedition in Minnesota.
Swam a cold bottle lake, let the flame dry off my face. Every spark became the sun of